If you're a woman that has been dealing with intense PMS, brain fog, lack of energy, and mood swings, there may be a chance that it has to do with your hormones as well as your gut health. And in today's podcast episode, I sit down with Kirsty, who's a functional medical health coach and expert when it comes to hormones and gut health. And she shares with us simple step-by-step steps that we can take to better our gut health as well as our hormones, get rid of these symptoms that continuously are bringing us down, and get back to feeling good again. And I think some of the things that she shares may come as a surprise for you and make you want to dive deeper into this topic, because oftentimes we're dealing with things without knowing the actual root cause of why it is that we're experiencing them. So I'm excited for you to listen to this episode. I loved our conversation. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hi, my name is Pernilla, and this is my Challenge Your Norm podcast. I'm absolutely obsessed with anything related to personal development, and well, to grow, we gotta challenge our norm. And so on this podcast, we chat about life and how we can challenge our normal way of living it to make it greater than we could have ever imagined. Just one little belief, habit, bold move, and challenge at a time.
Kirsty, I am so excited that you decided to join me here today on this podcast episode. You are a hormone health coach, and both I and all my listeners are dying to know more about that, because a topic that a lot of us have been dealing with recently is gut health and our hormones not functioning properly, and that really affecting our mood and our life and not feeling confident in our bodies. And I would love to first start off by asking what you, as a professional in this field, often come across women dealing with, having issues and not maybe knowing that it comes from their hormones or their gut health. What's something that you often see?
Yeah, like it's a great point in that often we have like a myriad of symptoms sometimes. There's like lots of things going on for us, and sometimes we don't connect that all of those things have the same root cause more often than not. So like you've mentioned, lacking energy, bloating, brain fog, just not feeling ourselves. And a lot of us live with those things for a number of years, I would say, before we decide to do anything about it. I think for a lot of women, if it's something to do with our period, if we have period pain, if we're, if there's those types of things, then we assume there's the hormonal connection. But when it comes to our energy, when it comes to other things, we don't always necessarily assume that it's going to come down to our hormone health. And I know from my own personal experience, I thought gut health meant, oh, it has to be something like bloating or gas, something that's in the stomach for it to be gut related. Now, my personal experience is adult acne. That's how I got into this, being so passionate about hormone and gut health. It never occurred to me that my skin was a reflection of what was happening in my gut. And then what was happening in my gut was also having this impact on my overall hormonal balance. And the more I kind of learned about it and dived into it, I was like, everything is connected. So, I work with a lot of women that are having symptoms that they think there's no association between them. And actually, they often say, like, are these associated together? Is this my hormones? And I'm like, it's a combination of everything.
So you got into this because of skin issues.
Yeah.
Had you been dealing with that for years and tried different things and not seeing anything working? Or can you share your story a little bit with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I developed adult acne in my late 20s, and I did not have acne at all as a teenager. So I thought I'd got away with it. I was like, had a really easy transition. A lot of my friends in school were like, really breaking out, and I wasn't. So I thought, I'm good. And then it developed in my late 20s, and I was living with it for a while. And then I actually lived in Australia for 3 years. And that was where I needed to sort of deal with it, because I couldn't wear makeup all the time because it's so hot and you're just sweating all the time. And I was living in an area where there's a lot more like holistic options. So naturopaths, integrative practitioners. And I'd been down the route of going to the doctor to talk about my acne, and they would just change the different type of hormonal birth control that I was on. Try this one, try that. And after 10 years of being on hormonal birth control from the age of 15, when I got to my late 20s, I was like, I would actually like to know what I'm like as a person without this hormonal birth control. And that's a whole other subject. But what I've learned about hormonal birth control was that it probably had a contributing factor to what was going on with my skin as well, because it impacts the gut, it impacts nutrient deficiencies. So, all of these factors were coming into play. So my gut health wasn't great. And I also had a thyroid condition that went undiagnosed by my doctor for a number of years because I was like normal. My results came back as normal. So I had acne, I had brain fog, I had chronic fatigue, I would need to nap every single day. And I was 28, living in Australia, should have been having the time of my life, should have been thriving. And I just felt, the best way I can describe it is that I just felt like, meh. I was just like, I'm not feeling high, I'm not feeling low, I'm not really feeling anything. It's weird to say it now, but I'm really, really grateful that I had adult acne because it's on the outside, and I'm not afraid to say it now, like vanity purposes, I was self-conscious, I was envious of people that were in the gym not wearing makeup, people that had clear skin, I was just really envious of them. So it made me want to take action. I think maybe if I'd only been dealing with brain fog or fatigue, I think I probably would have tolerated it for a lot longer until I got to a different breaking point. But for me, as a 28-year-old, not feeling confident, I was like, I've got to deal with this acne. So I worked with a functional medicine practitioner, and that's where I learned about gut health. That's where I learned about, okay, maybe the things that you're eating are not particularly supportive of your gut health, your hormone health. Maybe the way that you are relieving your stress, which was for me, I was going to CrossFit 6 times a week, sometimes twice a day. That was my stress busting for my, my really stressful corporate job. That wasn't particularly supportive of my hormones or my gut health either. So it was just kind of really eye-opening to me because I was what you would look at as like a healthy person. I was eating what I thought was eating well. I was eating lots of protein, but probably more processed foods than I was maybe realizing. And yeah, it just opened my eyes to think, wow, there's so much that I'm doing that's actually really counterproductive to what I need to do for myself as a female. If you look at what the guys in the gym are doing, that, yes, working for them, training 6 times a week works for them, but it just wasn't working for me and my unique biology. And it was just, when I realized it, I was like, it seems so obvious. But I think so many of us, especially as women who are like, we're busy, we want to work out lots and, all of that type of stuff. We don't realize that the wider impact that it's having on us as well.
I think this is amazing that you're sharing both with me and also my community because of a lot of us are so passionate about moving our bodies and
Mhm.
passionate about getting enough protein in, for example. And it's very, very important being aware of what works for our specific body. What was like the first steps you took? You were feeling the brain fog and you were dealing with acne and energy being low. What was like the first steps you took for anyone who maybe can resonate with that?
Yeah. Do you know what? I really wish now that and I'm sure you could probably resonate as well. Like, I wish I'd have documented it more when I was in it. But I was working a corporate job. This wasn't even in my future that I'd be sort of helping other women with similar things. I wish I'd have documented it more because I think the way that I did it it's not the way that I teach other women to do it. I probably made all of the mistakes, but it's good then I have the opportunity to reflect back and say, okay, if I was doing this again from day one, this is what I'd do. So maybe that's a better thing for us to start because, all right, let me tell you a few of the mistakes that I made, which I when I work with my clients, I'm like, don't do what I did. Like, let's learn from my mistakes. So for instance, I just decided one day after 10 years of being on hormonal birth control that I was just going to come off it. Cold turkey. Let's just see what happens. And I didn't realize the wider implications that it had on my body and what to expect. So, like, as I've mentioned, there is an impact that it has on the gut, and there is an impact that it has on nutrient deficiencies. So I think in hindsight, if I was doing that again, I'd be mindful of those nutrient deficiencies and would really focus those things in my diet, or maybe probably would need to be supplementing as well. And I would have probably pushed my doctor to do more thorough testing. Because they do really basic testing, especially here in the UK, and it's quite similar in Australia. But just basic things like vitamin D and other nutrients that we think that they don't have a massive impact on the body, but they do, especially when it comes to iron, things that we lose when we're bleeding, and how that has an impact on our energy, different things like that. So those are a few of the key steps that I always suggest that my clients take. It's like, if you're thinking of coming off hormonal birth control, think of like supporting your body as you come off it. Then it's thinking about actually getting some tests that's within your means, so that what am I actually deficient in? What do I need? Because I don't know if you experience this with your clients as well. We're normally taking so many supplements, and we don't even know if we need them. And then if we don't know that we need them, we don't stay consistent. I am like a case in point. I do not stay consistent unless I know that I need something. And the key things that I would always say, if anyone is coming to me with those things, so whether it's skin issues, whether it's mood, brain fog, the two key places that I would always start is balancing our blood sugar. So making sure that, the types of food that we're eating are actually going to support energy and brain fog. And it is just mind blowing to me how the smallest changes it doesn't necessarily have to be what we're eating. It could just be the combination of the way that we're eating things can have such a positive impact on our energy, our mood, and brain fog. Like those key things, I say to a lot of people I work with, if you do a blood sugar balancing strategy and you stay consistent with it for 5 to 7 days, or 7 to 10 days, you will start to have more energy, have better mood, and have clear thoughts. So that is why blood sugar balancing is like where I start
How
with
does
everyone.
how does someone go about doing that?
So it is, I say it's really simple, but obviously, that is what I'm passionate about, is simple strategies. We don't need to do complicated things. So in terms of the strategy that I share with anyone that I'm talking to, starting our day with a big mug of water. A lot of women that I work with will start their day with caffeine straight away. So I'm just like, I'm not saying don't have your caffeine. I'm just saying let's just delay it slightly. So let's have a big mug of water. It's your option whether you want to have a bit of lemon or lime with it, so that we're actually hydrating the body after we've been asleep. And for a lot of women, that helps with the daily bowel movements as well. That glorious morning bowel movement that we're all craving. A big mug of water, like at least half a pint. Yes, it's like the dream. It's the dream when that happens. It really helps with that as well. So that's how I would always suggest that anyone starts their morning. And then, depending what time you wake up, ideally having your breakfast with a source of protein within 90 minutes of waking up. If that feels like a bit of a push, I always say just try and eat something with protein by 10 a.m. And the reason for 10 a.m. is that it has a really positive impact on our circadian rhythm. So how we start our day is going to help how we end the day. So how well we sleep, how easily we fall asleep, which, for a lot of the women that I work with, they're tired but wired. So we feel wired at the end of the day. So that's all about how we start the day. And most of them are skipping breakfast, because skipping breakfast, I have done it for years. I used to intermittent fast. It's convenient. We don't have to make a meal before we go to work. Like, I completely understand, but breakfast is so, so important. So, and then it's just thinking about every 3 to 4 hours having a meal, or like in the afternoon, for instance, having quite a substantial snack. So you're having a source of protein with that snack. So we're not having this massive gap between lunch and dinner. And every meal kind of focusing on like a good source of protein and carbs and fats, like making sure we're having all of those macronutrients. And, just having that incidental movement throughout the day as well. So say, for instance, for me, I know that my blood sugar doesn't tolerate white rice very much, and I love white rice. So I know if I want to have a meal with white rice, I will either have like a shot of apple cider vinegar beforehand, or I'll eat a carrot because it's got fiber and I love raw carrots. And then I'll have the meal and I'll go for a walk after, because then my body's actually using the glucose from that meal. So it might still spike my blood sugar, but it's not going to have such a big impact. So for a lot of people that have that kind of lull after lunchtime, this is normally an indicator that maybe we've had something that's been quite carb heavy, maybe we've not had enough protein. So we almost need to just help the body use that glucose that it's getting from the food. And the reason that blood sugar balancing is so impactful is just the way that insulin works in the body. Like, it impacts every single cell in the body. So it's no wonder that if we are not sort of converting, if we're not converting insulin very well, and we're having too much insulin because of too much glucose, that there's like a whole body impact, that could affect our mood, can affect our periods, and that's the reason why, because insulin is such an influential hormone. So that's, at a basic level, that sort of simple strategy.
Great strategy. I love that. And also, it's simple to go to. It's really about, okay, how do I actually do this in practice? Like, okay, if I just plan my meals ahead, or plan at least like what I'm going to do for my meals, then it's actually pretty simple. It's not like you need to go out and buy, crazy things. You just need to have the protein and the different sources of nutrients ready during those times when you got to fuel your body. So I love that. I really want to ask you about how the gut and the brain are connected, because it's something that I feel it instantly.
So we've got what's called like the gut-brain axis. So exactly that. There's like this connection between, a really strong connection between the gut and our brain. And, there's like neural pathways, there's all sorts of like communication that's going on. And, I think modern medicine is finally catching up. Like, if you go back to like ancient times, like Hippocrates, whenever he was around, he said all disease starts in the gut. So that's everything. And the gut is known as the second brain. So, and we only have to think about how, when we're feeling anxious, for instance, which is something that we're like happening in the mind, that I'm feeling anxious in my brain, we will feel anxiety in the stomach. If we're nervous about something, like what happens when you're nervous, like you get butterflies in your stomach. So for some of us, we'll literally need to go to the toilet immediately. Like, this is the strong connection that we have between the gut and the brain. And then, like, outside of that, there's just amazing things. Like, when you actually understand what's happening in the gut, like, we have our microbes that are in the gut as well, and they can send messengers of like what we need. So for instance, for a lot of women that I work with that have different types of, whether it's skin issues or gut issues, like candida, so an overgrowth of candida, which is a bacteria, literally can impact the brain and can impact the way that we crave certain foods. So this is one of the first things that I say to the women that I work with who, we are so hard on ourselves. Like, I've got no willpower. I can't give up sugar. We say these things to ourselves, and I'm like, willpower is actually a very, very small part of what you're experiencing right now. Because if the gut bacteria is off, and when I say off, I mean there's more opportunistic bacteria, so the bad guys, versus the good guys, the ones that kind of make us feel good. If there's a dysbiosis, so if something's out of balance, those gut bacteria can actually send signals to the brain to say, I really want some of that like sugary stuff. And the cravings can be so intense that you're like, I don't even know how I've now got this like tub of ice cream in my hand. So yeah, like that's, again, like I don't know if we quite understand how that connection works, but those signals are being sent from the gut. And it's the same thing when it comes to hormone balance as well. For instance, heavy periods, periods that are clotty, painful, tender breasts, migraines, those types of symptoms are often because we have too much estrogen in the body. We need estrogen. Estrogen is amazing, but things often happen. So things like endometriosis, for instance, they're driven by too much estrogen that's circulating in the body. We actually have very specific gut bacteria called the estrobiome, which is meant to deal with recirculating estrogen so it can break it down and then move it through in our stools. So when the gut bacteria is out of balance, you bet it's going to impact our hormonal balance as well. This is why, going back to like what Hippocrates told us years and years ago, and modern medicine is sort of quite catching up, but quite slow, I would say. If something's going on, we need to be looking to the gut.
Thank you. That's amazing. I wanted to ask you something because I've never spoken with a hormonal health coach before. And also, I just want to mention that if anyone listening wants to work with Kirsty, then I'm going to bring all her links in the top of the description so that you can check out all her work and hopefully get connected so that if you're experiencing some of these things, you can actually go in and get help with solving them. What are your thoughts about birth control?
Birth control in general, I will caveat this before I just sort of say, my take on it. It is really personal. It is always a really personal choice, and it's always, to find out what works for us the best. And each of us will have different experiences. And, as I've said, I was taking the combined hormonal birth control, so the combined pill, for, over 10 years. So my stance on any form of birth control is I want women to be able to make the best choice for them with all of the information available. I don't feel that when we are going to have a conversation with our practitioners about the various types of birth control that are out there, that we are being given all of the information. Like if I went to my doctor now and they tried to prescribe me hormonal birth control, and that could be the pill, that could be the Mirena coil, that could be, we can get the implant. And I said to them, I'm worried about the impact that it's going to have on my gut, and I'm worried about nutrient deficiencies. They would kind of really disregard that. So it's really difficult to have a conversation, but there's a whole heap of studies on it. And if you're really interested in this subject, especially if you're taking hormonal birth control, there's a really awesome book called Your Brain on Birth Control. It's super fascinating, and it's backed up with studies. Like, that's what I love. It's like, we want these things to be backed up with the research, because as women, we are massively under-researched, and it takes such a long time for us to have actual research on the things that we're taking. So back to your question in terms of, so with the copper coil versus like the Mirena coil, there's no hormonal impact in terms of the copper coil. So for a lot of women, that's a good option because they still want to be able to cycle normally. They still want to have those hormonal fluctuations. So for a lot of women, that works well. But, one of the main side effects is heavy, painful periods with the copper coil. Like, that is something that it can cause. Something, that I think, again, they probably want to look into more, and we definitely need more research around it, is, does the copper coil cause copper toxicity? What is happening to that metal that is in the body? Is it having a wider impact? So that is also something to consider as well. And I just don't think we've got enough data on it. So, for me, when I did come off hormonal birth control, I just, I didn't want any other form of anything at that time. So I have been practicing, taking my temperature and tracking my, so basal body temperature and cervical fluid, so that I can understand when I'm in my fertile window. So I use what's called like a natural form of birth control. And I'd say I'm probably more cautious with using, different forms of protection as well. So like condoms and things like that. Like, I've been with my partner for over 10 years. So in terms of like sexually transmitted disease, not worrying about anything like that, but I'm more conscious. I'd say I'm probably over conscious in terms of like, 6 days of our cycle, we're able to, we're fertile. And that 6 days is mainly because of how long sperm can live inside us. So, it's being cautious around those times. And the reason I was interested in that is that I could start to get really connected with what was going on with my body. I help my clients a lot with sort of understanding their form of birth control and what's working for them. Are you happy with it? Is it something you're considering changing in the future? So I think that's it. And it's a very personal choice as well.
What is something that you wish more women knew? When they come to you, oftentimes they're just not aware of, but then after you guys speak, it's like a relief, or it's like, what is that? Is that how something works within the body?
Yeah, I think overall, I wish we all knew sooner the power that we have for our health, because I feel that for the majority of us, and this was my personal experience, when I didn't feel well, I would go to the doctor, they would tell me what to do, and then I would leave, and that was that. I sort of didn't realize that how I experience my health is actually down to me. And so my qualification and how I got into this is through functional medicine. So as I said, like when I had quite a positive experience with a practitioner that worked in functional medicine, I decided to train as a health coach in functional medicine so I can help people understand the root cause of what's going on for them and to put simple lifestyle strategies into place. And one of the things that will always stand out to me from that training was that 20% of the things that are going on for us are genetic. So, the saying that just sticks in my mind is that your genetics load the gun, but it's your lifestyle that pulls the trigger. So you get to decide if your genes are turned on or turned off to certain conditions, certain disease states. And the majority of what we are experiencing, is down to our lifestyle. And when we initially hear that, that can be quite confronting because it's down to us, and it's not nice for us to think like, oh God, the way I'm living my life has actually contributed to this. But equally, we don't know. We don't know either. We don't know the power of nutrition. It's not something that we're taught in our schools, about the power of nutrition and the power of, finding the right type of movement for us. There's so much about we don't know. So I think first and foremost, and I'm surprised at how much I get asked this question, like, do you think I can improve my symptoms? And I'm like, you are the only person that can improve your symptoms. So it's handing back the power and saying, yes, you can, when you have the right tools. And I think that's where I think a lot of my clients, and I'm sure you probably experienced it as well, social media is incredible because we get to connect with so many people. But then when we are unsure of where to start, it can be really overwhelming. Like one person is telling you to do one thing, someone's telling you to do another. You've just got to sift through the noise and actually find the thing that you resonate with. And that's one thing that I'm so passionate about, is like, if somebody's advice doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to follow it. You can explore, you can experiment for yourself. And like anytime I work with a new client, I'm like, we have to change the mindset of you are now experimenting on yourself. And it's not a failure if you try and do something and it doesn't work. That wasn't a failure. It's a learning experience. And we go, what happened in that experiment? Now we just change course and we experiment with something different.
Made you realize that didn't work for you, and what did you switch into that you then realized, oh, this feels good for me? Or
yeah, like
it may have been a slow
don't get me wrong,
process,
CrossFit will always hold an amazing place in my heart. Like I love it because it got me into weightlifting. Before that, I was like, always on a diet, needed to like pound loads of cardio to like burn calories. That was my mentality about exercise. It was never something I enjoyed. When I joined a CrossFit gym and I walked into the room and I saw women lifting weights for the first time, just with an Olympic barbell, and I was like, wow, those women are strong and I want to do what they're doing. So it was more that I'm quite competitive by nature. So it was more that like I couldn't go into a CrossFit class and not give it my 100% all the time. Like even when I was on my period, I would be like really pushing myself all the time. And as I kind of got a little bit older, I was in my 30s, and I was like, why am I training? You know, when I first started CrossFit, I really wanted to compete with CrossFit, and I did for a little bit. And then I just thought, actually, I'm looking for longevity. I want to be strong, and having muscle is really important to me, being strong. And where I'm at now is that I do kind of still like to do those types of workouts. Like I love strength and conditioning because, you know, they're both really important. But if I had to just focus on one thing, and again, this is where I share with anybody that was willing to listen to me about it, I'm like, weights, body weights or weightlifting, like women lifting weights it is just so important for our longevity. The more muscle mass that we have, the better our transition is going to be when we go through when we go through menstruating, but also when we go through menopause as well. Because going back to insulin, when we transition through to perimenopause, we become naturally more insulin resistant. So when we use weights, when we're working out, when we have more muscle, again, like for women, it's a fine line. We don't want to have like everything muscle because we need fat as well for our hormones. So it's like that fine line. But being strong and lifting weights, even if it's just body weight, is just so important for our longevity. So that's kind of where I stand now. I'm very much more aware of where I am in my cycle, and I will change what I do and how I do it. I normally will always train the same way. Like I'll do some strength and I will do some conditioning. But what I will change throughout my cycle is the intensity. And normally for me, I don't train around my period. I choose not to. I go for walks. I would do just more sort of lower intensity stuff. And the reason that I do that is that what I was finding is that after my period, I was not sort of, I was feeling quite fatigued for a few days after my period. And when I started reflecting on it, I was like, it's because I'm not resting. I'm not slowing down in that phase where my hormones are lower, where I'm naturally feeling more introverted. I was kind of pushing myself to go to the gym. So when I started slowing down, when I just started walking, actually just having naps and resting, that's when I started to realize that my energy would start to rise faster after my period. And this is a conversation I was having with somebody on social media the other day. They were like, I just feel awful after my period. And I'm like, tell me what you're doing. She's like, I intermittent fast and I go running every day. And I'm like, you know, first and foremost, we need to be fueling ourselves before we work out. This is a huge thing that I've figured out. Again, as more research comes out around women, we ideally want to fuel ourselves before a workout with carbohydrates. And then we want to fuel ourselves straight after, like within 30 minutes of a workout with protein and carbs. That's what a woman's body needs versus men. So when I spoke to that woman, I was like, we need, you know, just start nourishing yourself. You know, your body needs the fuel. And I don't know if you felt the same, but like growing up, there was this weird obsession of mine of like fasted cardio, because I probably read in a magazine that it burns fat, and it just stuck in my head, and I always thought that that was the way to go, and then wondered why I was so fatigued the rest of the day.
I love that you're sharing all of this, because I feel like when we hear an expert sharing that it's okay to slow down when you're on your period, when you're in general, when you're feeling weak,
Mm,
and
yeah.
your body needs something else. When we've heard that that's actually the healthiest thing for us, a lot of us high achievers who want to show up and be tough always, having heard something like that allows us to, okay, maybe I should take a step back right now, because that will make me feel so much better in the future.
That's kind of what I say, is that when we start
Yeah.
tuning into our cycle, or even like just checking in with how we feel on the day. How well did I sleep? You know, like if we wake up in the morning and we've had like a broken sleep, we're not feeling great, our blood sugar is already going to be elevated. That's just naturally what would happen. So we're already going to start craving things, we'll start feeling sluggish. So whether you're checking in with your menstrual cycle or whether you're just checking in with how you're feeling day to day, having that connection to yourself and that body awareness, and then deciding what you need on that day is almost, you know, the way that I teach the menstrual cycle and connecting with it is it's using it as like your permission slip to rest. And I think, as like you said, high achieving, whether it's people pleasing, like as women, you know, we don't want to be seen, I would say, as the weaker sex because our menstrual cycle. That's not what we're saying here. We're not saying use your period as an excuse to slow down. It's more that you realize that if you do slow down in a few days' time, you'll be back feeling better. But if you don't slow down, this period, this slower period is going to linger and you will feel like you're kind of pushing yourself against yourself. That's what I used to feel like I was doing all the time. I was like fighting against myself. I was like, why does this feel so hard? I was like, because I'm not listening to what my body needs.
You mentioned fasting really quick, and I'm curious.
It's a really interesting subject, and I think generally there's a bit of a divide around it, I would say. So I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Mindy Peltz. Like, she does amazing work around hormones, and you know, she's written a book called Fast Like a Girl, which is use your menstrual cycle to dictate your fasting cycle. I know Sophie, who we've talked about, has used that method, and I've looked into her method. For me, and this again comes back to finding what works for you and what makes you feel good. For me, as I don't advocate for regular intermittent fasting because, as I've said, you know, the eating window for me is really important. So having that source of protein by 10 a.m. is really important because of the implications that it's going to have later down the track in terms of like what's going to happen in the evening. For me, I know that when I fasted, it didn't support my thyroid health. So for a lot of women, I would say the majority across the board, we are generally quite stressed. There's a lot of stress that we're dealing with. So there's cortisol, which is elevated. When we are fasting for long periods of time, the body sees that as a stressor. So, you know, the body is then pumping out more cortisol because it's stressed. So creating safety in the body, which is really important for healthy ovulation, and ovulation is important whether we're trying to conceive or not because it floods our body with amazing hormones. We want to support that kind of regulation of cortisol. So that's why I don't recommend intermittent fasting. But what I do sort of suggest that we all consider is finishing our evening meal at a fairly decent time. So at least 3, maybe 4 hours before we go to sleep, because it's going to help us get into a deep restorative sleep. So that could be a way to do it. Because really, if you think about it, intermittent fasting is not eating for a period of 12 to 14 hours. Most of us will actually naturally do that. So for instance, I had my dinner yesterday at 6 p.m. That's when I finished eating. And then I haven't had my breakfast until 8 a.m. today. So that's actually 14 hours. So I'm giving my digestion a break. I'm letting my body do what it needs to do. What I don't sort of advocate is that finishing dinner at like 7 p.m. and then not eating anything until lunchtime. And what normally would happen for women, I would say, is that we are then only having 2 meals in that day. So we're not actually getting the nutrients that we need, whether it's the macronutrients or the micronutrients through our food. We're actually just starving ourselves a little bit. So that's normally what is happening. So unless you're then making a conscious effort in your eating window to make sure you're eating enough, which I think that a lot of women probably aren't going to be doing if we're skipping breakfast. We're not then going to add in another meal. That seems quite counterintuitive to us. And in terms of those longer fasts, I'd say there's more and more research coming out about the benefits of them. But again, I don't know how much of that research is being done on women and what's the wide, yes, okay, it might have a positive impact on one aspect, but what impact is it having on our overall hormone health, for instance? So I just don't think there's quite enough research. And I'm always passionate about experimenting on myself first before I kind of suggest anything.
I love that you're experimenting with your own body before you share that with others. That's something I try to do as well with all the things that I share with others. It's like we have a different understanding of it when we've gone through it, right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
like
Like
that
you
a
don't
lot.
know what happens in the mind until you've gone through it, and trying to have that understanding as well. Obviously, there's only certain things, that we can sort of test. Like recently, I've been testing with a glucose monitor, and I, tested all different types of foods, and it was really interesting. I was eating almond croissants on an empty stomach. I was pretty much doing things that I used to do, and just to see how that was impacting my overall blood sugar.
You've been sharing it on your Instagram, so everyone listening can go to your Instagram and check those out.
Yeah,
It's
and it
very
was just
inspiring and
wild.
exciting to see.
It was wild to see that after sort of 2 weeks of just sort of throwing everything that I normally do out the window and doing these experiments, the wider impact that it was having on my gut health. So, I might not have acne at the moment, but I have this reoccurring skin issue. So my issue is always something's going on in my gut, it will reflect on my skin. So this skin issue, it's like a bacterial thing, just flared up. And I was like, after having it under control, it just took 2 weeks of like eating more refined carbohydrates, more sugars, and not quite having the enough of the good stuff, that this skin issue just flared up. So now, again, going back to like experimenting on myself, now I am undertaking a 30-day gut health reset to kind of show people the power. Like we don't need very long for, to essentially reset the gut and to sort of help. Is just, I think, and this is the thing that comes out for a lot of my clients as well when they do it, is like, we then have this strong connection to the power of food and the food choices that we make, and how it's so strongly connected to how we feel. Because I think sometimes, we just pick up these habits with eating, don't we? And we kind of just get into a bit of a routine with it, and we don't actually appreciate how the things that we're eating has a direct impact on our mood, or how just like a certain food is triggering the bloating. So when people have that moment and they're like, wow, that's what they need then to decide, okay, is that food going to be something that I'm going to eat every day? Or is that just going to be a food that I'll have occasionally? And I don't know if you talked to Soph about this, like with the AIP, like when you're doing any type of reset, there is a period that people would be like, well, that's very restrictive. And I'm not for restriction at all. But there is an element of that we have to go through a pause. We have to pause certain foods that we know trigger certain symptoms. So then you can find out exactly what triggers your symptoms. And then when you get to that place of understanding your own triggers, you get to decide, how often do I want to eat that food? Is it an occasional food that I get to enjoy? Or is it actually, I don't want to eat that food at all because I really don't like the way that it makes me feel? So that place is such an empowering place to get to, that it's why I'm so passionate about, everyone really at some point in their life doing that sort of 30-day reset. So one, you can feel how amazing you will feel at the end. And then you get to decide, I call it like your unique nutrition strategy, because it's unique for all of us. Some of us tolerate a little bit of gluten. Some of us can tolerate, other things, soy. Whereas, until we've gone through this process, we don't know what works for us and what doesn't work for us.
So you would recommend everyone to do the AIP diet for 30 days? Yeah.
Not necessarily
Oh,
the
that's
AIP. There are
okay.
various different resets. So for me, I just do like what I call like a basic 30-day reset, which is pausing gluten, dairy, soy, alcohol, and kind of like inflammatory seed oils. The reason that somebody would consider the AIP, for instance, is if you have like a known autoimmune condition, which could be irritable bowel disease, it could be a thyroid condition. There are a number of different things. Or that maybe you've done the 30-day reset, and the thing that you the symptom that was you wanting to improve hasn't improved. So that maybe then you need to look at potential other triggers, which, as part of the AIP is things like nightshades, eggs, like healthy foods. So yeah, in terms of doing just a gut reset, like a 30-day reset where you just pause even just those basic inflammatory foods, I think for everyone to experience that at least once in their lives. Also, it's because I think when you consider it, when you think, okay, these are the things that I need to pause for 30 days, we think that we're not going to be able to do it. And it definitely gets a point, probably about halfway, where you're like, there's no way I can carry on. And then you smash through that and you're like, so it's almost like smashing a limiting belief as well, because I feel that, food has quite a strong hold on a lot of us, especially our reward system. If we think of like when we're celebrating or when we want a reward, it's either alcohol or food. So we have to almost like reprogram ourselves of like, okay, well, what does a reward now mean to me? We still should treat ourselves like we should still celebrate, but what would I do differently? Like I saw that on your page, you're saying that you've not had alcohol for years. So again, like there's like, reprogramming what we associate with celebration and reward, because the thing that blows my mind, and I am somebody that does drink alcohol occasionally, is that that's deemed as for me as like a reward, but it makes me feel like absolute shit. So I'm just like, how am I rewarding myself with something that doesn't make me feel good? But it's so ingrained in our society. So actually the reset is way more than about what we're eating. It's all of these kind of connections that we have to food and celebrations and things like that.
Even just going through a challenge like that, right? Like realizing like, wow, I can actually stick to this commitment that I made to myself, and I have the power to make the right eating choices. Like when you've done that for a full month at a time, it's like you can remind yourself of that for the rest of your life. For me, like sugar, I love sugar and I will want candy all the time. But if you've gone through a phase where you actually have been consistent, you can remind yourself, I've done this before, so I actually am in control if I want to stop it again, whatever
Yeah,
habit that we develop. Yeah.
exactly. And I'm the
I
same.
love
Like
that.
I know that sugar is like the thing for me. Like I know that my gut will flare when I've had too much sugar. And that's definitely what's happened in the minute. And it only takes a few days of like getting over those sugar cravings. You start to feel so much better. Like the brain fog lifts, the energy starts to come back, and you just think, I do this every time that I do it. I'm like, why would I ever go back to eating sugar? But it only takes like one almond croissant and then I'm like, I'm back in there. So it's just
More. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I really get that. I'm the same. Amazing. For everyone who's been listening, I'm sure they want to go connect with you on your social platforms, check out your website so that maybe potentially they can work with you. Where can they find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on Instagram. So I'm Natural Rays Hormone Harmony, and we'll have all the links to post there as well. So the main way to work with me at the moment as well is that I've got a super accessible membership, which is all around like so many of the things that we've been talking here today. So around gut health, understanding your hormones. And yeah, there's a really lovely supportive community in there as well. So yeah, if you've got any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out as well. But yeah, I share so much of my own story and lots of tips as well on my social media.
Incredible. Kirsty, my podcast is called Challenge Your Norms. So I have one final question for you. If you had to challenge the listener's norm in some way, something you want to challenge them to go out and do today or this week that you believe would have a good impact, have some positive impact on their life, what would that one challenge be?
Yeah, I think, it comes back to that blood sugar balancing strategy that I talked about. So just challenge yourself, or like just whatever wording works for you, like commit over the next 7 days to just put in that blood sugar balancing strategy into place and just see how amazing you will feel. It's pretty much like, it's like a money back guarantee. If you do it and you don't feel any different, I'll give you some fake money back. But I have not had anybody that has done it and hasn't felt better. So if you want to feel better in 7 days, it's just the simple strategy to follow.
Thank you so much for sharing everything, all your wisdom and light with us today, and for coming on. Thank you.